Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Flux Dev Meeting. Let me have a look at the agenda. Okay. Does someone want to volunteer to take notes? Please.
You got it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kingdon. Yes, I see your name there. Brilliant. Okay. So there's our normal agenda, which kind of standing agenda, which is a roundup of what is happening on the way to GA. Without Stefan or Hida here, we may have a slightly impoverished version of that, but let's give it a go anyway. I know one thing has happened, which is that I have approved Sunny's PR, which rewrites all the tests in image automation, and gave a couple of suggestions, which I think I said were just there to cherry pick if you want them, Sunny. And I think, oh yes, the other thing with the image ones is that another thing to do is the cross namespace references to sources. That is actually waiting for it to be implemented elsewhere. So there's a library for doing that, but I think the actual type itself doesn't, the Git repository and other source types don't actually have the ACL field in their types yet. That's still happening. So it's waiting for that. But the implementation is pretty straightforward because there is a library to do it for you. Yeah, has anyone else got news with respect to GA? Oh, Stefan's here now. Cool.
Hey, sorry, I don't have this meeting in my calendar for some reason. Got deleted. How can I edit?
No worries. I remembered that and sent you a reminder.
Thank you. I guess I can delete both the old one as well and re-add the CNCF calendar. Is that the right way to do it? Or?
Yeah, I think so. That might be the way you have to do it. That's how it works for my calendar. It's just another calendar that I've added in.
Okay.
Like I haven't accepted the meeting or anything like that. It's not an invitation.
Okay.
Stefan, do you have an idea of other stuff apart from the image controllers that needs to happen before GA?
Yeah, I think there are no updates since the last meeting. We still have to finalize the case status conditions refactoring everywhere. I'm planning to create a separate proposal RFC for the multi-tenancy approach. I have an idea of how to simplify everything that's written there and apply it to the current API. And yeah, if we can discuss it now if there is nothing else.
Yeah, do you want to put it on the agenda, or maybe Kingdom's been quick enough to, I don't know, not yet.
Yeah, I'm trying to type as we go, but
Yeah. Hard to keep up.
Yeah, so what we really want is a way to install Flux and then enforce impersonation, no matter for all of the Flux reconcilers. That means Flux customization resource or a Flux Helm release resource should not work without impersonation, should never default to the cluster admin like what we do today. That will improve a lot our multi-tenancy approach and covers the main reason why that proposal was there. Now, talking to other users that are currently deploying Flux in a multi-tenant setup, what they would really like is for, hey, when I install Flux, can I tell Flux some way enforce this default for me for service accounts everywhere? And I feel like if we make this change, like allowing people when they bootstrap Flux, when they install Flux, or afterwards, they could patch the Flux controllers and set with a flag a default for the service account name. And the default could be default. The default service account is everywhere in every namespace. So we will no longer require admission controller that checks, oh, you haven't set the service account name, so I'm going to reject your custom resource because you have to set it here and so on. So we'll no longer need such a mechanism in front of Flux. What will Flux do is, if you don't specify a service account name, it will use whatever the cluster admin has described for the whole cluster. And let's say the default is the service account default. That means no reconciliation will work. Everything will fail because the default service account has no rights on anything by just, it can only read the cluster version, I think. Now, for people that are using the Flux create tenant command, they can set up their own, convention. For example, they can decide, hey, we'll have a Flux reconciler service account in each namespace, and we make sure that's there. And when we bootstrap Flux or install it, we set the default account to Flux reconciler, right? And then it's up to them to create RBAC and everything. The CLI helps you create that service account for the service account and the role binding to give full access to that particular namespace. This change implies two things. One, we have to change Bootstrap and allow and add the service account name to the root customization, which will be the customized controller service account, which has cluster admin rights, or we can create a dedicated service account called, I don't know, cluster reconciler or whatever, and set that into Bootstrap. So that will be a change to the Bootstrap procedure where everything will run under a service account. And if we go on that direction, then we can remove the cluster admin role binding for Helm controller and customized controller. And what that means is that the new RBAC for the pods, for the controllers service account will only have the right to impersonate the user and nothing else. So in order to bootstrap, you have to impersonate the user with cluster admin, because bootstrap means Flux itself applies its own custom resources, RBAC, and so on, right? So we can make sure we have this service account in the Flux system namespace when we bootstrap. The controllers that are changing the cluster state, by default, their service account binding to their pods can do nothing but impersonation. And then it's up to cluster admins to set up service accounts in each tenant namespace and give them enough permissions to be able to reconcile their applications in there.
So this will need a design doc, right? Because we basically the advice from spoilers, the advice from the security auditors was that the multi-tenancy design needs to be written up, you know, as a kind of self-contained design, and I think the same would be true of any alternative.
Yeah, my proposal here is to extract only this part from the current proposal. So the current proposal has this idea: hey, the service accounts for the pods should not have cluster admin, should only have impersonation. We should default to something and use that as the default. That could be either a service account or a group or a user. Then it goes into other aspects around IAM roles and all that stuff. So instead of having this huge proposal that is very hard for people to digest, I just want to extract that idea from there, default to something without having to use a different tool like a webhook for that, and explain why we are doing it. Because in the current proposal, there are so many things in there, and there is no introduction like, what's the motivation for this? I see myself, I could write a motivation for this particular topic because I truly understand now users have requested it, and it makes sense in my mind. All the other things there, I'm not quite sure was the right way to do it, but this proposal means no changes to the current API. We don't add principal. We just use what's in there, so it's backwards compatible. We have the service account name. What we are going to do is, hey, if you don't specify the service account name, it will use a default instead of, you know, going straight to cluster admin what we did before. And that's a breaking change.
Yeah,
a behavior breaking
and I'm
change.
sure
Not
that was
in the
suggested
API, but
right
in
at the start. But I guess times change. Yeah, so when you write it up, I would also write at least gesture at the Lee's design, in particular the difference being impersonating users by default rather than service accounts, and say what are the advantages and disadvantages, like, you know, alternatives considered, because that is an alternative. I mean,
no, I think we should at some point go with principal in the API and add that a new field where we allow people to say, I don't want to deal with service accounts. I don't generate kubeconfigs. I don't let people connect the cluster in that way. I want to use users and groups, because then no one can run a pod in their namespace under that identity.
Right. So it's a simpler design,
yes,
as a stepping stone to more sophisticated designs. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Yes. Worth stating that then, as a comparison. Just saying this is, you know, the fuller design might be more flexible, but this one gets us somewhere. So yeah.
Yeah. What are the advantages to this approach is that you have to opt in. You have to specify a default when you install Flux in order for this to be enforced. And second of all, you don't have to deploy yet another controller, create custom resource definitions and so on to enforce this behavior. Like, you can enforce it through Flux by enabling this flag in both controllers. We'll probably expose this flag on Bootstrap, and you'll be forced into choosing. Do I want to provide the default, or I'm fine with whatever was before, because I don't care about multi-tenancy. I don't have tenants. Everybody here is a cluster admin. Bootstrap will basically prompt you if you don't specify that, and will make that flag required. So yeah, we'll definitely affect those that are running Bootstrap in CI. They will have to modify their CI jobs or whatever other automation, Terraform or whatever they are doing to add that flag. I want a default or I don't want a default. So
yes, that you have to pick one. Yes, that's the same formulation as for the other more complicated design. Yeah.
Yeah, but we leave the groups, users, and all that thing for a third iteration of the multi-tenancy. So right now we have what we have today is, yes, you can specify a service account. You can enforce it with some other tool. We can enforce it. Second iteration is you can enforce a service account name and you can specify a default for it. Third iteration is we add a new construct to the multi-tenancy called principal, and there you can choose between different types of impersonation and set up default users, default groups, and so on. My main motivation for this is I want to move the multi-tenancy proposal forward, but what's currently there today is too much to take in, and it's quite hard to understand how we can implement all of that in a single step. So
yeah, I think just getting it to a point where the default is secure is, or at least people can have to choose to have it insecure is a great step, and it's not like radically different to what it does today. It's just building that in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. And do you think that is a prerequisite for GA?
So right now in the roadmap, we have that whole pull request as a prerequisite. I would, after I make the new RFC only for this particular item, then I would modify the roadmap, add only that RFC as the requirement. Once we all agree and we merge that, then yeah, the roadmap basically will change and have a shorter period of time, at least, for getting to GA, as these changes, what I'm proposing, are not radical changes to the controllers, are, I don't know, a couple of lines of code that checks, hey, do you have a default? Yes, let's use that default. So the code changes are minimal, in my opinion. Adding a required field to Bootstrap and providing a default through a command line argument.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But that doesn't mean we don't have to implement ACLs. ACLs are added a different topic there in the roadmap, and I think that should be placed there because there are two aspects of this: how we do reconciliation and how we do access to sources, sharing sources across the cluster. So I really think we have implemented ACLs for image repositories, and I do think we should have those into source controller as well.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a library. It's proven that, we have a proof that this is how it works. People already are using it. So I don't think it adds, I don't know, a limited time to GA because of that. It's more about wiring the library.
Automation objects, it's really easy. It just needs those fields to be in the source types.
Yeah.
So it's probably more organizational stuff than it is actually writing code. Okay. Is there other stuff maybe we should, have we got there's a GA roadmap, right? So we could actually look at that and tick off each thing. Well, not as in tick it off as in done, but tick it off as in we've talked about it, if anything has changed. Roadmap. Go to that. Okay, API consolidation is unchecked. Okay, that's the rewriting things to the new package runtime. Yeah, so that's kind of tied up in a bit of a knot at present, isn't it? Which we might need Ida to explain next time.
Yes.
Okay, multi-tenancy improvements, we just talked about that. Documentation improvements. Incident management and troubleshooting guides, developer guides, and cloud-specific guides. We've done some of the cloud-specific guides, I think.
Yes, only Azure.
Just Azure, okay. And developer guides. Are there any incident management?
So developer guides are in the works. We've added a lot of documentation to our packages that can be viewed on GoDoc. So that was the first big step in having better dev docs, is documenting our packages and code better. And now we have to have like in our docs an overview that points to all these GoDocs and give there an example of how you can use all these packages together. Like we have good documentation now for each package, but we still need an introduction doc into those.
Right, there's good reference docs, but there's not and this is how you actually do it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. What about incident management and troubleshooting guides? Is that?
Yeah, so we have scattered information around different guides. For example, we have an incident management section in the image automation. Hey, I've automated some image. That image has a bug. How can I roll it back or pin it to a particular version? We have some hints on how you can do the same stuff for your whole cluster state, where you can pin a Git repository to a particular version. Now, if you go to Helm releases, the Helm release documentation, the Helm chart API spec, there it says, hey, you can actually pin to a particular server, to a particular version instead of, having a server range and so on. But yeah, people keep asking about those on Slack, and I think it's better to have like a troubleshoot guide where we at least link to all this stuff and give an overview. Hey, how can you do rollbacks? Okay, depending on your source, you have to set these fields. If you are dealing with image automation, here is the link on how you can pin to a particular tag. Like the developer guides, it's more about, giving people a landing page from where they can dive into the specifics for each thing. And for the troubleshooting, we now have a commands in our CLI that allows you to troubleshoot all sorts of issues. Like we have Flux trace, we have Flux tree, we have events, kubectl get event, we have Flux logs, minus level error, minus kind, whatever. We should create, I think, a cheat sheet, and like kubectl has, like Kubernetes has on their website for kubectl, where we give examples of how you can use the CLI to troubleshoot different errors, how you can get to the root cause. there is very common, because our APIs are layered one on top of each other. You, for example, if you look at the Helm release, the Helm release will say chart not found. Okay, but don't actually know what's going on. If you look at the chart, maybe the chart will say index not found. When you look at the Helm repository, that's where you actually see, hey, we cannot get the index because, I don't know, there is a network issue or the index URL is wrong and so on. Right? We should have a troubleshoot guide for Helm releases, and here is the commands that you can run to investigate your system and find the root cause. Same for customizations. A customization can say path not found, but maybe the path is not found because the source controller wasn't able to clone the repo and things like that.
Yeah, stuff like, I mean, that sort of thing is always ongoing, isn't it? You always find little cases of, oh, it'd be good if we told people about this because then they would know, all that sort of stuff. About the documentation specifically, it sounds like the main thing to do is to just kind of gather what we have and try and have one place for it, essentially, like a one-stop shop. Okay. Okay, cool. That's all the GA stuff.
Yeah.
I think. I just need to make a note of that one thing. API consolidation. Work in progress. Okay, review audit follow-up. I'm not sure whether this is a standing, maybe a new standing addendum. It has a link there, so I can at least look at what that is. Okay, so the project board. I think there's lots of sort of individual things, but I think sort of one of the themes is there's a bunch of fuzzing PRs. Do we know what we need to do to be able to merge those? I mean, I think I do broadly, right? They need to have less duplication.
Well, the Google environment cannot download controller runtime, cannot run kubelet and etcd. So to me, it seems that everything is broken. We cannot run tests on their infrastructure in a way we do it. So yeah, someone needs to investigate. I get emails that all these things are failing, no idea how to debug them. That environment is completely unknown to me. So I think someone should volunteer to look into this and investigate what's going on and what's the right way forward.
Yeah,
it depends a bit on the controller project. The ones that
again, hit it.
It depends on the controller project. The ones that have simple image builds should be fairly easy to get merged in a way that the tests work because they don't have any seeded library dependencies, which makes a static build hard. The image automation controller, however, and the source controller have the static build issue.
Everything is failing, not only those. It cannot download controller runtime. It cannot download env test. So env test is failing. You cannot run env test in there. I have no idea why. So we can't merge anything.
Do the fuzz tests use env test?
Looks like it does. I don't know why, but it does, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So basically someone needs to go and spend days figuring that out.
I think it will take a fair week indeed for someone to figure out how to get it into a shape that's also maintainable, because the other problem is that all the fuzzer tests have their own Docker file. So it's another thing that will require attention or automation to follow the changes to the other things. So we either need to figure out a way that we layer stuff so that the fuzzer can rely on partly on the other build configuration or something. But yeah, it needs investigation.
So it needs statically linked binaries. And there's a lot of duplication.
Yeah. Then there is the checksum change that has been changed in reconciler's dev, and it can theoretically be cherry picked, but I didn't see the value of cherry picking it if we are still not doing the validation part on the other controller sides, on the consuming controller side. So while it would take one thing of the work in progress list, so at present we use SHA-1s for checksums. I already changed this while I was rewriting the source controller logic because I noticed we were using the wrong algorithm. But we are not actually doing something with the checksum values while we are consuming the artifacts. So changing it would take it off the to-do list and give a percentage more of finalized reporting issues, but the work that finalizes it and it actually makes it work, should be done on the customized controller and on the Helm controller.
Yep. So it needs to be very, as well as using, what was the advice?
They said SHA-2, so we use SHA-2 165.
Instead of SHA-1.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, is there any other stuff that sticks out from the audit project board? Linked from the...
Yeah, there is stuff about closing files and checking the size of the file before you're actually going to read it. But given I'm at present working on a PR on the source controller that already touches the refactoring of the Helm elements, it's better to combine it with those things because the file closings are, it could be a quick patch someone does, but the configuration around the file size is something that should be partly discussed with users, I think.
Maybe.
Because what's the max file size? That depends on the system.
Yeah, I mean, some of those, that one, maybe you can actually step around it by using a reader rather than doing read all and then parsing. I don't know.
It won't, because if you want to use the YAML decoder from the SIG, which is used across all Kubernetes projects, it does a YAML to JSON Marshal without going through a decoder. It does it wants all this bytes basically, then it does a transformation to JSON with all the bytes without a buffer. It just wants a byte block, and then it parses that. So you will end up with all the bytes in memory anyway. And I had a chat with Lucas last week, who I noticed was working on some changes to that library, and he basically said, you can do it, but you would need to combine about 3 different packages if you want to decode it using a decoder in the same way that the library works, and it's probably not worth your effort and better waiting for the v2 to v3 chains, after which they will look at introducing a decoder again, because there is a PR open for it. And that would unblock us to do efficient YAML marshalling. But without that, and with us relying on the YAML library, we always need all the bytes. So there is no way to go around it. And to mark why we need the YAML, specifically that YAML package, they do the YAML to JSON transformation to ensure that the format is the same. So if we would use another library, then we may get different validations issues on YAML or parsing issues or other things.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, either way, it lots of the stuff is just sort of individual things to go and fix, aren't they, rather than being one big bang. I'm just looking at lots of the open things that someone could just go and fix them. We just need to work through them. Okay, let's make sure that we have time to talk about the last thing that's on here, which is image authentication, support for Azure and GCP. Samtoshi, I think you're working on that. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so far I have a draft PR open, pull request open, and I have like the basic work done for the both of them. I think I need someone who has access to check if it works with, currently it works with Azure managed principles, managed identities, sorry. That's one authentication method, but there's also this other one where you can create it with a service principal, and it needs higher privileges than I currently have on the Azure account. So if someone can, probably I'll like post instructions on the PR. But yeah, so there's a draft and it's almost done. I just need to configure CodeQL so that it's not failing because of its version. Well, yeah, it's almost done. It's like good progress.
The implementations look like the ones in Flux V1, which were done quite a while ago. And I wonder, I do worry that kind of things have moved on because they're both slightly hacky. Is that a fair thing to say, Samtoshi?
For the one for GCP sort of like worked out of the box. The one for Azure needed we needed to change a bunch of stuffs because I think what was currently there is the code that works with the service principal. I'm not sure because I couldn't test it, but it doesn't work with the managed principal, but I was able to get it working. But the one for GCP still works pretty decently. I don't know if it needs to change. Yeah, we could, they have an SDK, but I don't think it's needed. They have an SDK where you could
yeah, not if you can just make a request to an endpoint. Seems to be the case. Yeah, it's the Azure one I was thinking of mostly. I mean, it's good that the GCP one still works, but the Azure one, you kind of have to mount a file from the host file system or something, if I remember.
Yeah, we still have to do that. Yeah. That still has to happen. The change now is that if you're using managed identities, the fields that will normally contain the client's ID and the secrets sort of just have MSI, the word MSI in it. So you have to like make a bunch of requests to get the actual token that you can use to pull the image.
Okay, yeah, I figured the kind of the security model would have moved on in the meantime, but it sounds like it has, but only in the direction of being more complicated.
Yeah. I don't know if it helps that they are no longer storing, like keeping the secrets in the file, but we still have to mount the file, which means that the normal deployment of the controller won't work. You sort of have to give it more privileged access so it can get the file from the host. Yeah.
It might be worth talking to Philip, who has quite a bit of experience with Azure. He may know Philip Lane, that is, who may know like a sort of more official way to do it if there is one, or maybe
Okay.
you already have. But I mean, check in with them anyway, maybe.
Okay, I will.
Cool.
So Santochi, my understanding from the Azure docs is that once you use MSI, you don't have to mount, you don't have to reach out to the files on the node. Is that right?
And you have to, because you need an ID, and we get that ID from the file, the file that was mounted. We don't take the secrets, but we need an ID that we don't have normally.
I don't think so. For example, we do the same stuff in customized controller for SOAPs decryption with KMS, and we don't mount any file. We get the SMI ID from the environment because Azure injects that in your pod environment. So there is, I would look into using only MSI with the environment variable there and not mount any kind of files. We cannot allow that. Like unlike Flux 1, Flux 2 does not run as root in the container. And we don't want people to be able to mount host files because that breaks pod security policies. It will, like Flux will be banned by all OPAs, Kyvernos, everything once we do that. So I would really like to avoid it and use the new authentication thing that relies on MSI and just the environment variable. So
Okay.
if you can look a little bit how SOAPs does it and how we do it in customized controller, there is also a blog post on the Azure website around Flux and KMS. So they're on their official documentation with Flux 2 and KMS, they show how this is done. And I'm telling you for sure, we don't mount any files. So
Okay.
if we can do the same stuff for ACR, which I'm guessing we can because MSI is just a way of authentication, we should just use that and tell people that's the only way we offer automation for Azure. The file mount is such a terrible hack. I will not do that. If they need that, then let them use a cron job like they do today.
Yeah,
That's my opinion,
I think
right?
that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll
Cron job's a better alternative.
yeah, I'll check if the environment variable thing, it should work. Probably I didn't look too deeply, but yeah, I'll check it and see if I can make any changes.
Well, thank you.
So as far as setting up a test environment and how that works, it looks extremely straightforward in Azure. There's a box that you check that says, make sure that we create a container registry and associate it with the managed identity. And it looks like it's fairly straightforward in GCP, not as easy as checking a box. You have to set up some DNS stuff, but it's all well documented. Does that sound approximately correct? I have set up the environment for Azure, but I haven't been able to test it yet. And I have a Google Cloud environment set up, minus that stuff that's documented in the DNS. I don't have the doc handy right now, but you have to change some DNS setting for the cluster so that it knows to reach the correct endpoint for the private authenticated registry. And then does that make sense? Does that sound right?
On GCP?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. I'm glad I
It
haven't
should work.
like
It
yet.
should work with no network changes at all.
Okay, I'll search some more then.
Is your cluster private?
No,
Okay, so it could just reach out to GCR public public domain using the managed identity from the cluster.
And it's called managed identity as well? Okay.
No, it's called, wait a second.
What identity?
Everything is in the SOPs guide.
Okay.
Because the authentication works the same everywhere. One second.
What's the Azure thing that integrates with SOPs? What was it? That there's a blog post about that you mentioned, Stefan?
Yes, here is the blog post.
Ah, you've got it. Perfect. Thank you.
This
And as what Hida posted from the SOPs guide, you can actually see, from the SOPs source code, you can actually see that the environment variable on Azure, the environment variables that are injected in your pods have Azure tenant ID, client secret, username, everything. Like you really don't need to mount any kind of files.
The link I just posted in the chat contains the whole Bootstrap setup for authenticating towards Azure KMS and then using that to fetch the key and then using it for decryption. So if you are after the key, then stopping at the point where it fetches the key and then continuing with your own logic should be sufficient, I think.
Yeah. So Kingdom, it's on Google, is called workload identity. So you enable workload identity and you should be able to reach GCR with without any DNS things.
Got it. And then I just need to put this annotation on the appropriate pod, the one I posted in chat here. IAM.
Yeah, on the, you have to annotate the image reflector controller service account in the same way we do it for customized controller. Here is how it works for SOPs, and customized controller should work the same.
Great. I will
It's like by far the easiest solution from all these cloud vendors. It's just an annotation, and yeah, workload identity is enabled when you create a cluster, or even afterwards, it's just a check on the UI.
Oh, and the good news is I did look up how do you do a similar thing in DigitalOcean, and they actually have a checkbox that injects a read-only secret into every namespace that you can use as an image pull secret. That's exactly what we need. So
yeah, so we don't have to change anything inside our controllers. People have to just reference the secret in their image repository, right?
And it's read-only by default, which is amazing.
Great. Yeah, AKS does the same stuff where if you create the cluster with AKS Cattle, you get read-only access to ECR in that region on all nodes, on all pods by default. No changes required to the cluster afterwards.
Okay, that looks like everything that was on the agenda, table of agendas. So, and we are just on time, so that worked perfectly.
I'm just going to go ahead and update the meeting time, if that makes sense. Has everyone already switched their daylight savings time? Because this meeting is 7 a.m. for me now, and I think that it's supposed to be an hour later.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you want to move it an hour later. Yes, that's fine with me as well.
Cool.
Great.
7 a.m. is a bit early.
Wouldn't it be better to stick it to like some time zone that has daylight saving, so that we don't have to switch the time every time the daylight? Because I think the problem is that we stick it to UTC, and UTC stays the same all the time. So if we would stick it to, I don't know, UK time, which is UTC +1 or UTC +2, then every time daylight saving goes on or goes off, we don't have to manually change all our meetings.
The bug
Yeah,
scrub
good
is
idea.
set to Eastern time and it did update automatically.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it would be more practical if we stick it to like London time.
Is that something you can do in the CNCF calendar?
Yes, it can.
Cool.
Anyone object if I stick it to Eastern time, since that one changes a week later? Then by that point, everyone's time will have already adjusted, or?
Yeah, that's okay.
If you change the meeting next time, we have to change it, and I don't have to think about what Eastern means to me in time zone. Then yes.
Will it be the opposite when daylight savings comes back?
Oh, that's a.
Sure.
Okay, so there's no particular advantage to using any. I mean, maybe it makes sense to do it in like an EU time zone for this one, which is meant to be earlier for and
I almost prefer
US time zone for the other one.
Until we get to this point where everyone's clocks have already adjusted and no one can help but notice that the meeting's moved by an hour. And then we fix it. But I'll set it to London time if that will make it.
No, I think Michael's idea was fine. If this meeting is supposed to be possible 10 to for. Wait, what's the early meeting? European?
Yes.
So this meeting is European focused.
Okay, so we'll set it to London.
And the one on Thursday is focused on the US. Yeah, so then I would set.
Later.
Yeah, then I would set this meeting to UK time, and then the other one to Eastern time or something.
Sounds good. That's actually less confusing then. That makes reasonable sense.
Cool. Thanks for that, Kingdom.
So much for ending
All
on
right.
time.
Yeah. Well, we've got another hour because of daylight saving, right? So no, I've misunderstood. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.